Hey, DawgNation, I'm Brandon Adams. Hope you're enjoying your Thanksgiving week. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door. And we're going to try to do a lot here over the course of the next 60 minutes. It's Jeff Sintel. Later on, it's our Marlos Tavern Insider Update with Jeff. We'll get more details on why exactly it was that Noah Sewell chose Oregon over Georgia, although I think deep down we probably know the answer to that question. We'll let Jeff talk more about that coming up. A little bit of a surprise five-star visitor on campus this past weekend for the Texas A&M game. Jeff will tell us about that. There was a 2021 decommitment. I guess we'll get into that a little bit too, and kind of, more maybe chatter about the idea that Georgia could be on commitment watch here this week. We'll do all of that with Jeff Sintel coming up. I've got an even bigger reason, or maybe another reason, the better way to say this, why Georgia fans ought to be really excited about the possibility of beating LSU. We'll deal with that. We'll talk a lot about Georgia and Georgia Tech on today's show, and just kind of the feeling of the rivalry from a Georgia fan's standpoint, and in particular the Georgia coaches and players, how they feel about it. We'll do that coming up, and some weird stuff coming out of LSU with one more game to go before they play the Dogs. I think you'll like this later on. This is actually kind of strange. We'll do that coming up. It's all on the way next as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
We will get into clean old-fashioned hate coming up in just a moment. Kirby Smart's thoughts on the Georgia Tech game this year a little bit, but at least for today, kind of focusing on the rivalry at large and kind of the perception of how this rivalry is viewed amongst people in the state and kind of maybe how it's even viewed a little bit in college football. We'll do that with Kirby Smart here coming up. Before that, though, Tuesdays also mean the re-release of the college football playoff top 25, and I'm interested to see kind of how all that plays out tonight. Obviously, I don't expect Georgia to drop down. I expect them to remain at number 4. There will be a little bit of drama involving Alabama, just on the basis that Oregon lost this past Saturday. That is, I think, objectively good news to the Alabama Crimson Tide, but the Tide may also be seeking other good news in the form of something involving the Georgia Bulldogs. Now, what I'm about to read to you, you already know kind of to be true. It's just sort of interesting to hear Kirk Herbstreit say this. ESPN analyst, obviously, interviewed by AL.com, the big website that covers Alabama and Auburn, the college football in the state of Alabama. And Herbstreit was talking ahead of the Iron Bowl on Saturday between the Crimson Tide and the Tigers, what the scenario is that would get Alabama into the playoff once again as an at-large team, much the same way the Tide snuck in that way back in 2017, and it involves the Georgia Bulldogs. Here is Kirk Herbstreit, as quoted by AL.com. Herbstreit says, Oregon losing was very significant for Alabama because it is 11-1 Alabama versus 11-1 Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game is setting up to the winner of the final rankings in my mind. However, he says if you're an Alabama fan, there are two things you're hoping for. Oregon upsets Utah because that would eliminate obviously the other chance at the kind of the one-loss Pac-12 team. And then Herbstreit says LSU, you need to make sure they beat Georgia. Herbstreit says, and this is the kind of the money quote, you don't want Georgia beating LSU. That would leave Alabama out. Now, listen, I already know that Georgia fans don't need any more reasons to want to see the Dogs win the SEC, beat LSU, quiet the throngs of people around the country that assumes that good offense beats good defense. Georgia fans don't need any more motivation for the SEC championship game. But I believe that Kirk Herbstreit just gave you a little bit there. I believe that Kirk Herbstreit just raised the stakes here for the SEC championship, because one of the things that we believe in life is that obviously there are games that make up a college football season, but really the sport is kind of a long game. What is it the smart people say? The infinite game. College football is kind of an infinite game. It kind of stretches beyond just 12 regular season games or any individual season. It kind of stretches on infinitely. And Georgia and Alabama are kind of a part of a long-range competition with each other. Even if they don't play this year, and it seems likely right now, more likely than not, they won't meet on the field. They are still competing with each other in the sort of long, infinite game that is college football. So can you imagine the smile it would put on my face? Admittedly, I'm not too proud to admit this. The smile it would put on many of your faces to think that Georgia, by virtue of winning another SEC championship, which would be smart second, by virtue of beating LSU, which has been kind of the darling of the college football world this year, in addition to just the sort of general joy that comes from that, Georgia could also eliminate Alabama from the college football playoff, forcing the Tide to sit at home, go to a New Year's Six Bowl for the first time in the college football playoff era. You don't need an extra reason to make the playoff, but boy, that'd be an awful lot of fun here. So Georgia, by winning out, could also make things a little painful, a little miserable for Alabama coach Nick Saban. That's kind of a fun thing to think about there. We'll obviously follow that story as it goes. We'll have more on this, in fact, a little bit later on in the program. Let me kind of shift gears and talk about something else for a minute. Obviously, before Georgia gets to the SEC championship, it's got another date in Atlanta to think about, and that's clean, old-fashioned hate between Georgia and Georgia Tech. Now, one of the things we talked to John Stinchcomb about on yesterday's program, John was a part of the first team to win an SEC East to Georgia, and he became the first Georgia team to therefore have the burden of preparing for the in-state rival, knowing you had a bigger and better game coming the following week. And the Georgia team in 2002 passed that test with flying colors. And really, for the most part, the Georgia teams that have won the SEC East have handled Tech pretty easily the following week. The honest truth is that's because this rivalry game hasn't been quite as much about throw the records out the window as you might think. Better team typically wins. Georgia, when it's been the better team, hasn't had to worry about distraction too much. Not in 02, not in 03, not in 05. 11 and 12, kind of much the same way. The Kirby Smart era in 2017, 2018, kind of very much the same way. Georgia's just kind of been ready for Georgia Tech, even though it had the bigger game to look forward to the following week. I don't expect things to be any different here in 2019. And I think the good news for a Georgia fan is, just given the way that the college football playoff conversation dominates the sport now, and just given the fact that Georgia plays so many bigger games than Georgia Tech, this rivalry, in my mind, has never seemed smaller. It's never seemed less relevant around the state. I travel all over the place, meet with Georgia fans all the time. No one ever brings up Georgia Tech anymore. I'm not even sure Georgia Tech's talking about Georgia all that much. This rivalry is just kind of quiet and, in my eyes, more insignificant than it's ever been. But that could be a potential landmine for a Georgia team that's a big favorite here, thinking about bigger and better things. The good news, though, is I don't think you have to worry too much about that, because one of the things that Georgia is just in pretty good shape regarding is that it has a coach that understands the history of the program. He understands that history because he has been a participant in that history. He's had some great moments. He's had some disappointing losses, but he has been around the Georgia program. He knows the thoughts and minds of Georgia programs, of Georgia fans. So even in a year when it seems like overall the Tech-Georgia thing is not all that big of a deal, it is still one of those rivalry games that Georgia fans really, really want to win. I liked the way that Connor Riley said it at DawgNation.com already this week, that it's not necessarily the biggest and best one to win, but it can be the worst one to lose. Kirby Smart also alluded to that as well. In fact, he talked about just the traditional nature of the Georgia Tech rivalry and kind of where the focus is for the Georgia team here this week. Here's some of what Kirby Smart had to say about that.
I think this is one of the most traditional rivalries in all of college football. I don't know that our scheduling is going to change the fact that it's not going to move the proximity of their university and ours. I mean, we're always going to have interstate rivals, whether it's through recruiting, whether it's through recruiting students, really through anything. So I think the history and tradition is there, that this game is always going to be a big factor.
The one thing I do kind of disagree with Smart on a bit, he says, hey, the history and tradition means this game's always going to be big. But y'all know this. Histories and traditions have to be preserved or they will fade away. And just in college football alone, think about the fact that Texas and Texas A&M no longer play each other. Kansas and Missouri no longer play each other. We can cite lots of rivalries that used to matter. This is the last year that Notre Dame and Michigan are going to play each other, at least for a really long time. This is, kind of an age in sports where rivalries, if everyone doesn't agree to sort of maintain them and make sure they remain a big deal, they can kind of fade away over time. And if we're not careful here, those folks who care about Georgia Tech, if you're not careful, the significance of this rivalry could completely fade away there also, because there's something else that Kirby Smart said that I don't know that he meant to say this on purpose, but I think he accidentally revealed the truth, at least in terms of how UGA fans view what clean old-fashioned hate, which has always been the nickname this rivalry has had. I think Kirby Smart accidentally revealed kind of a real truth about this. Listen carefully, and as Smart talks a bit more about the rivalry and kind of what it means, and maybe alluding to a divide that might exist a bit among some Georgia fans. Here's Kirby again.
As far as the rivalry, I mean, it's always, I mean, when I came to school here as a player, it was one of the biggest rivalries there was. It was what you talked about as a freshman. It's what was ingrained in you to, have the hate and build that up. I think because of the conferences and because of the importance of winning your conference, That may have diminished some in regards to over the time, but the rivalry is usually based on wins and losses and who's winning those games. Georgia has so many rivalries that you can't say one's more important than the other. You don't think it's important, then lose it, and then it'll be really important. And I know the importance of this game, and I know the significance it has to so many of our fans, especially the crowd that may be older, that traditionally, when Georgia Tech was a national powerhouse year in and year out, it means so much to them.
So I think what Smart says there at the end is kind of the accidental truth of the whole thing. That amongst Georgia fans, how Tech is viewed is very different depending on if you're younger, if you're older. I'm 42. I'm probably like right in the middle of the demographic for Georgia fans. People who are older than me, I do think, care about Tech and the rivalry a lot more than people who are younger than me because they just haven't really grown up with Tech being very relevant. If you're way older than me and you can remember Bobby Dodd and the really good Tech teams, the game may matter more to you than really any of the rest of us. I mean, there was a time in Georgia football history that Theron Sapp had his jersey retired at Georgia simply because he helped break the drought against Georgia Tech. What was it? Was it 7 in a row, 8 in a row that Tech had won the series there at that time? Sapp was the drought breaker, and that was such a significant moment that he got a jersey retired at Georgia alongside the other program greats. That's how different this used to be. But the younger you are, the more difficult it is to remember that, and the more the young people start to grow up and become the older people, you start to wonder, will the Tech rivalry still mean anything to anybody there at that point in time? Be that as it may, though, the one thing that we do know for sure is the game means something to Kirby Smart, and that may be all that matters for right now. And as Smart explained this week, part of the reasons that's true is because he actually remembers some disappointing moments, or at least a disappointing moment in this series. Here's Kirby again.
The memory I have is probably the worst. It's what you always do. You don't remember the positive sometimes. You remember the bad. It was my last home game at Sanford Stadium, and lost on a game-winning field goal with Joe Hamilton's drive. So that was my last memory of Sanford Stadium. Thank God I got into coaching, so I got to fix that. But otherwise, that would have been the last time that I was in there, and that was a tough loss that with Georgia had won at that time. I think maybe 3 or 4. I'm not sure how many in a row they had won, and our senior class lost it to a well-coached, really good football team.
So let me see if I can kind of wrap all this up this way. If you look ahead way into the future, I'm not quite sure what Georgia Tech is going to mean. I'm not even quite sure it's still going to be played. But for now, it is on the schedule. It is Georgia's next game, and Georgia fans want to win it. They want to beat up on the in-state rival. And the good news is the focus and determination that Kirby Smart seems to have for all of UGA's rivals, I think makes the likelihood of a Georgia win, and maybe a convincing one, all the more possible here on Saturday in Atlanta. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door. It's great to have you with us, no matter how you get to us. Video, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, it's all at 10 a.m. Radio on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. We're there at noon. And, of course, podcasts, wherever you find them, Apple, Google, and the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just really glad to have you with us, and appreciate Pella Window and Door for making it all possible. Pella Window and Door of Georgia can help equip your house with energy-efficient windows and doors, and they're going to do so with the service for which they're famous. They're a national company, but they have a locally owned branch right here in Georgia. That means they're able to provide that kind of family-oriented service for you. They've got a great offer as well. You can take advantage of this right now. How about 40% off qualifying installations or 0% APR for the next 48 months? That offer is valid through January 9th. And Pella can take care of you on that, so make sure you reach out to them online, pellasoutheast.us. That's pellasoutheast.us, or give them a call in their Dunwoody showroom at 404-445-2979. 404-445-2979. Pella Window and Door of Georgia. It's viewed to be the best. We're going to get Jeff Sintel here coming up in just a moment. Before we do that, let's go around the doghouse. I want to take a look at the Georgia defense here just for a moment. And I think there's something about the Georgia defense that's true that maybe has been misunderstood nationally just a bit. One of the things that we've said here on our program is, hey, what makes this defense for Georgia different than some of the other Georgia defenses of the Kirby Smart era, including the one that went to the playoff in 2017, is that defense was obviously led by a star, Roquan Smith, and in 2019, they're just less led by any kind of superstar player. And that's, I think, undoubtedly true, except the national media takes that narrative and turns it into, the no-name Georgia defense. And I'm obviously overgeneralizing. That's generally the way it's kind of, reported of, hey, this Georgia defense doesn't have any stars, but boy, it's getting the job done. And I think we would kind of push back on that notion and say, there may not be an individual superstar that stands out amongst the rest of the pack, But that's not the same thing as saying they don't have any stars. What's actually true about the Georgia defense is there's so much production from all three levels of the Georgia defense that it's sort of hard to pick one guy out from the other. And in fact, as this defense continues to raise its level of play, what you're seeing is maybe the absence of a superstar, but also now seemingly the absence of a weakness. Remember earlier in the year when some double moves caused Richard LeCounte to maybe bite a little too early, and all of a sudden some big pass plays took place, and LeCounte, who's been kind of the subject of Kirby Smart's ire sometimes in very public ways. Remember when that was a storyline for this team? Boy, over the last couple of weeks, doesn't quite seem like that's been a storyline at all. It seems like LeCounte right now is playing as well as anyone, including the veteran partner he has in the safety group there in JRE. I think LeCounte's continued emergence is one of the legit reasons why this Georgia defense right now ranks as well as any unit in the country, including the really prolific offenses that you see on ESPN all the time. In fact, yesterday, Smart, in his weekly press conference, also agreed that right now Richard LeCounte is pretty clearly doing some good things for the Dogs. Here is Kirby on LeCounte.
He's playing with a lot of energy and passion. He's practicing better. He takes a lot more pride in making his calls and learning the game plan that he can make good decisions on the field in the heat of the moment. I think he's taken a nice step forward in regards to that. He plays really hard. I mean, he doesn't always play with great eye control or great discipline, but he plays really hard, and he gets after the ball. He attacks the ball.
If I haven't been clear about this in the past, let me be even more clear right now. I absolutely believe the Georgia defense is good enough to beat LSU in the SEC championship game, regardless of how the Georgia offense performs. It's not a guarantee. I'm not going to tell you for sure it's going to happen. All I'm telling you is I know for a fact this Georgia defense can go face-to-face, man-to-man with any unit, including the prolific Tigers offense that it's going to see in a couple of weeks. Richard LeCounte's one of the reasons why. As he rounds into form, it's very hard to find any weakness anywhere on this defense right now. Among the first 11 to play, or the next 11 that come in after that, or a few of the third-string guys that would be starting for a lot of teams in the SEC. This Georgia defense is as dominant as advertised. And right now, LeCounte's one of the reasons why. We'll get Jeff Sintel here in a moment. Before that, though, make sure you check out DawgNation.com today. Up at the top of the page, special feature from our friends at Kroger. Big announcement here. As you get ready for the holidays, Kroger's got you covered for a holiday home decor. Gift cards, gift wrapping, all those essentials, toys for the kids, everything else. You can start saving right now upwards of 30% off when you shop at your local Kroger store. That's around the Doghouse here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door. We'll have more on the SEC championship game a little bit later on, but for now, on everything concerning UGA recruiting, let's talk to our buddy Jeff Sintel.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
A lot to get into with Jeff Sintel here as part of our Marlos Tavern Insider Update. Also, before we're done, I'm going to tell you about our big Marlos event coming up next week and how you can be a part of it. The VIP giveaway that includes dinner for four. We'll do all of that coming up here in just a bit. For now, though, let me welcome in Jeff. Jeff, happy Thanksgiving week to you. We appreciate you being a part of it. And as I'm sure you might imagine, we're going to start our conversation with the five-star linebacker Noah Sewell, who's obviously been on the wish list for Dog fans for quite some time. But Sewell made maybe the logical choice he was kind of always destined to make. Certainly I was skeptical about this one for a while, but maybe the logical choice he was always destined to make by choosing to follow his brother to Eugene, Oregon, and play for the Ducks. From your perspective and based on your reporting, I know you'll be writing about this at DawgNation.com, but can you give us a little bit of a taste of kind of how all this went down and what ultimately the deciding factor for Noah was?
Yeah. Hey, Brandon. Good morning. Happy Thanksgiving to all. I think the thing there with Noah is maybe even, your words there don't really ring true. I don't think destined to go to Oregon really works here, especially with some of the comments that he gave me after his decision, and we'll have those up on DawgNation shortly. But I mean, really, he described it as a true back and forth affair, and kind of the exit interview, at least from a Georgia perspective, that we had with him regarding his recruiting is he had some very interesting things to say, and he also had nothing but positive, classy things to say about Georgia, Glenn Schumann, Kirby Smart, and the way the Bulldogs really made that a four-quarter fight for his eventual college commitment.
Of course, one of the things I'm fond of saying is there are no silver medals in recruiting, and yet you can't fault Georgia for trying to go out and get the biggest and best players you can get. So I guess let me ask this question this way. What's an appropriate batting average when you think about Sewell, who's a West Coast guy, at least, far west, Utah, brother at a power program like Oregon? That's a difficult recruitment. You could say the same thing about five-star running back in Louisiana last year who LSU wanted. That's going to be a difficult recruitment. Georgia's gotten plenty of these guys, hasn't gotten them all. So when you're trying to be a national recruiting program and really setting yourself up for challenging situations where there is an obvious choice other than Georgia, what's the appropriate batting average in those recruitments supposed to be?
Yeah, so I was kind of going through the list here, and you would let's just call it a difficult recruitment, a difficult pull. And I would say Georgia might have at least a Barry Bonds drugstore type batting average with a lot of these guys. You got to think about George Pickens, Alabama, definitely a contested out-of-state recruitment.
Yeah,
the same with Clay Webb. The same with Tyreek Stevenson, the same with Nakobe Dean. I've just rattled off 4 from the last recruiting class.
Yep.
You look at Kendall Milton, I would say that one was very hard. You would have to label Noah Sewell now as a miss. Mikhail Sherman is very hard. I mean, you start ripping through the names, Brandon, especially since Georgia's star has risen since the 2017 season. With all the swirls of negativity, sometimes folks need to remember that what this staff has done in 3 of the 4 seasons so far. I don't think this century Georgia's stock hasn't been this high, but maybe 3 or 4 other years since 2000. I think folks get kind of lost on that, but I think to stay back on the train tracks here, Brandon, with Sewell, it was going to be a hard pull from Utah. I think the degree of difficulty there, that's not the black diamond slope for Georgia. I think the degree of difficulty here is you add in the fact that his older brother, Penei Sewell, went through a torturous recruitment, which is the way it was described to me, with Oregon when there was the coaching change from Taggart to Cristobal, and he was starting to go to Oregon, and then he had to back things up, and his older brother's recruitment got very messy, and some really good bonds were forged there, kind of to the point where, when his father, Gabriel Sewell Sr., was, laid up in the hospital with a surgery, Cristobal and the Oregon staff had lost the game, and they had a planned recruiting visit to check him out, just, to visit Sewell that week, his older brother. And then after a loss, the Sewell family just kind of thought, no, they're not going to make it, especially now. And that Oregon staff came and visited him in the hospital, of all things, just kind of try to show that what their relationship was going to be like, recruiting their son and hopefully signing their son going forward. I think that stuff's really tough ground to make up, but the reporting we're going to have on the site says that Georgia did make up all that ground, and I'm not going to give too much out, but
sure,
there was a point where Oregon was trailing the University of Georgia in this recruitment.
So let me kind of say this way. I mean, on the one hand, it's certainly fair to say, well, Georgia didn't really need Noah Sewell, so therefore it could roll the dice on a player who's obviously gifted based on the film of Sewell that we've seen. However, there is now something I think that Georgia needs now that it hasn't gotten Sewell, which is to find out a little bit more about what it has at some of these other linebacker spots. For instance, Quay Walker's clearly good enough to play, but is he going to emerge and be a top flight, I don't want to say superstar, but for lack of a better phrase, superstar type performer? Is he going to raise his level of play even more? Channing Tindall is one of those guys when healthy I've kind of always felt like was kind of close to breaking out, but as a junior in 2020, does that come more to fruition? We don't really know much right now about either Ryan Davis or Tresman Marshall. I guess now that Sewell's not coming, some of that depth that Georgia's recruited for the last couple of years, all of a sudden finding out what you have in those guys becomes a little bit more important for 2020, doesn't it?
Yeah, but, Channing Tindall's in the mix there as well, and he's been hampered with injuries this year during his sophomore season. But let me see if I can put the handshake together from 2019, 2020 recruiting in the 2020 season. I want everybody to pay attention to their DVR copies and watch how, it looks like for first and second down, Georgia's inside linebackers, you've got Tay Crowder and Monty Wright there. Those two fellows do a bang-up job, do a terrific job. The Georgia inside linebacker play this year has been stellar. after it was kind of a shaky point for the team last year. But what happens on third down? Third down is when you usually see Nakobe Dean trot out there, and also Jermaine Johnson, and maybe sometimes Quay Walker for those nickel and dime looks that Georgia likes to put out. Well, what Noah Sewell could have been, and this is why the only reason they were recruiting an inside linebacker, because there's a stack of depth that you just documented. The only reason why they were chasing a guy like Sewell's a guy that wouldn't have to come off the field.
Yep.
Because he would be an effective first and second down linebacker, and then he could move in space and chase and cover guys over the middle of his territory, as well as any of those guys that are coming in for third down at Georgia. And, Nakobe Dean's having a strong season this year, but Noah's a guy that just is a highly adaptable plug-and-play player that we haven't seen the likes of probably ever in the recruiting world.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair to say. There is nothing that I enjoy hearing more than the idea of surprise five-star visitor for a Georgia game. We'll get to that here coming up in just a moment as a part of our Marlos Tavern Insider Update with Jeff Sintel. Before that, let me remind you about a next week. Great event going down Thursday, December 5th, the Marlos at Peachtree Corners. It's our Marlos matchup. Now, all year long, that has meant John Stinchcomb and me talking about the upcoming game, which that particular week will be the SEC Championship. However, next week, though, our biggest Marlos event of the year, because in addition to John and me, it's also going to be Jeff Sintel previewing the start of early signing period. So you get John Stinchcomb, Jeff Sintel, myself, all next week, Thursday, December 5th, at the Marlos at Peachtree Corners, 5210 Town Center Boulevard. That's 5210 Town Center Boulevard, Marlos Peachtree Corners. That comes up at 6 p.m. And for the first time ever, we're doing a Marlos VIP giveaway. Now, this is actually going to be really, really fun. It includes VIP seating for 4, dinner for 4, courtesy of our friends at Marlos Tavern. Who doesn't want that? We're going to throw in a DawgNation gift package as well. So do me a favor. Now, we've already gotten a lot of these, so keep them coming. We're going to keep it going now for a couple more days. DawgNationHelp@gmail.com. That's the email address. DawgNationHelp@gmail.com. Just throw the word Marlos in the subject line and then give us your information. We'll kind of put your name in the hopper and draw out VIP seating for 4, dinner for 4, DawgNation gift package, a Marlos giveaway for Thursday, December 5th at the Marlos in Peachtree Corners. That's going to be an amazing time. All right, Jeff, I am not a recruiting analyst. That's not what I do for a living. I do the show for a living. However, I think I can pretend to be one here for a moment and say, when Darnell Washington, a 5-star tight end who lives in Nevada, comes to Georgia on an unofficial visit on his own dime for the Texas A&M game, sits through the weather for that affair to be there in Athens, I'm going to say that's a good thing for Georgia. Am I doing pretty good analysis as kind of a pretend recruiting analyst on this?
Brandon, maybe you should start up your own blog, man. I think that's a pretty fair weather way to look at it, because you got to remember, Georgia's a team that we're told is really hard to attract tight ends, given the way that those guys don't get, usage rates and frequency in the offense. And yet you have a young man here, Darnell Washington, that still has official visits left on the table. But he comes in from Vegas on his own dime and checked out for Georgia's last.
Did we lose Jeff? It's about that time. Typically, around the 10-minute mark, it seems like that happens. So we'll see if we can get him back on the phone here, let him finish discussing Darnell Washington, who I think is a really interesting prospect. And one of the things about, Jeff said about Noah Sewell, I think is also pretty appropriate for Darnell Washington as well. Jeff said, hey, if you got a Noah Sewell, you don't have to take him off the field. Washington seems to be one of those guys as well who you can do so many things with. Maybe quick enough to be kind of that flex in, which seems to be popular right now. Georgia, a lot of times when it has tight ends on the field, it kind of lines them up wide. It almost looks like 11 personnel, even though you got the tight end, kind of out there doing their thing. So, obviously Washington's one of those guys that could potentially do that. He is big, he's quick, he's a 5-star athlete for a reason, and I do take it as a pretty nice sign for Georgia's chances with him that he would come to Georgia kind of on his own dime that way. And listen, it remains to be seen what happens with the Theo Johnson and the sort of the idea of the dream tandem of tight ends. Maybe that's not going to come together. Maybe that's not going to come to fruition. But on his own, in his own right, Darnell Washington's a pretty impressive prospect. In fact, Jeff Sintel is now back. Talk more about him. You were just kind of getting into, Jeff, the fact that Washington was here and how that makes things look for Georgia as it tries to add an elite playmaker at that position. I'll let you pick up from there.
Yeah, so he basically has a lot of official visits left on the table. I think he has at least 2 of those left on the table, and he chooses to fly in from Vegas for an unofficial visit on his own dime, so to speak, and check out Georgia on a dreary day. The view before the game was he was in the poncho, stomping down the steps, and I mean that's only a way that a 6'7.5", 270-pounder could do so in the West End zone bleachers. And one of those guys I wrote on the DawgNation forum. You don't really need a name tag. You don't really need to see his face to know that that's Darnell Washington. There's very few profiles. There's very few, big beanstalk type players as Darnell Washington is. Maybe the only guy that rivaled him physically there that was on hand on Saturday was 6'7" Amarius Mims, the junior offensive tackle, or maybe 2022 Tyler Booker, big defensive tackle out of ING Academy. But with all that, he's there on the field, getting wet, poncho on before the game. Here's what's very interesting, Brandon, and this is one of those things that I try to, listen to me here a little bit, DawgNation, on this one. Lean in a little bit closer to the phone. But second half, he's quite cozy sitting in the Georgia commitment section. There's Chad Lindbergh. There's Justin Robinson. There's Nazir Stackhouse. There's Carson Beck. Those guys are all quite chummy there in the bleachers together, watching the second half of that game together. It looked like there's already a pretty natural bond there between those guys already as they're watching the Georgia Bulldogs play another South SEC opponent on Saturday night.
Yeah, that's a nice thing to hear. I mean, Washington's a really impressive-looking guy, and so great to see him having a good time and apparently forging some pretty deep connections with some guys already committed to the G, so to speak. One of the guys that could join them pretty soon is Kevius Walker, who I believe had an official visit to Georgia over the weekend. Commitment watch for him here this week. Anything new to report on that? Obviously, a lot of Georgia fans on pins and needles for some legit 2020 news, and Walker would certainly count as that. Anything new to report as we are in now the week in which Walker was supposed to announce his commitment?
Well, I guess you mean legit 2020 good news, right? That's what you want. Yeah,
that's exactly right.
Zacchaeus is now in, I guess you would say he's retreated back to his own war room in Schley County in Ellaville, Georgia, if there is such a thing. He's probably, he took all his officials. Georgia got the last at-bat. We're talking about that view Saturday night from the Texas A&M game. Zacchaeus Walker was in the mix of all those guys as well, watching the game together. Visited Florida, he's visited Auburn, he's visited Alabama. Georgia gets the last official visit here. It's kind of maybe reverse mojo of how Oregon got the last visit for Noah Sewell. And he's going to hunker down. He's going to hunker down, and he's going to try and make his decision sometime this week when he's surrounded by family. He talks everything through over the holiday week.
So certainly hope he enjoys his holiday time, and obviously big decision looming there for Georgia fans. Jeff, as part of our Marlos Tavern Insider Update, let me kind of finish up with this, and I'm going to kind of broaden this topic a bit. Braylon Oliver, who was Georgia's first commit for the class of 2021, has now reopened his commitment. He's decided to decommit from UGA. So I guess would you mind just giving us a little bit of a thumbnail sketch on why it was he committed in the first place and what it was that has caused him to maybe open this back up, and then just kind of step out from that and turn this into kind of a big picture perspective of where things are for 2021 and when the first big dominoes of that class might start falling?
Well, that's a pretty broad topic. So Braylon Oliver was a guy that comes from rural South Carolina, and I mean that generously, in Belton Honey Path High School. He was a guy that camped at Georgia a lot. This summer, he was ready to commit. He held off until August 22nd, which was his birthday, to attach some sort of special significance to it. Well, here's what's happened, Brandon. This is the thing you always got to watch with these early commitments, especially a guy that was three-star, not really rated super high by the industry. Georgia gave him one of those better grades, like what they did with Eric Stokes, what they did with a guy like Jordan Davis, because they saw 4.4 speed, 6'3", 200 pounds, and physicality on the back end of the defense. And he was the first commitment for the class. Now, since then, Brandon, Georgia's added another player in David Daniel out of Woodstock High School, Georgia, another safety type, can flash some range, big, physical, fast athlete. to the 2021 class as well at safety. And, I don't know, Brendan, if you just so happened to notice the forum thread about another five-star welcome visitor from the 2021 class. That was James Williams, the number one safety of the country, out of Opelika, Florida. That's for Western High School. So that young man's about 6'4.5", about 222 pounds. And get this, there must be something with him about Georgia games and dreary Georgia games, because he was there for the Kentucky game, another mystified day, and then he was there for the Texas A&M game. And he saw Georgia's defense, play very well. And that's a guy, you wonder how many safeties does Georgia take? I'm pretty certain that Oliver wasn't getting the same amount of recruiting attention that maybe some of these other schools. He told me last night that Alabama, Colorado, Notre Dame, Georgia Tech, Tennessee, North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Clemson, all those schools are really lighting him up right now and giving it some strong recruiting interest. And I'm sure he's measuring that with the attention he still receives from Georgia as a public on-the-board commitment. And it just made him think that he just made the decision way too soon for his process. That's the Braylon Oliver thought bubble right there. The 2021s, I think, are going to be very interesting, Brandon. There's a big commitment watch we're looking at for the month of December, and that's 2021 offensive tackle Micah Morris.
Yeah.
He has said he wants to make his decision known in December. Marius Mims still seems like a guy that it would be a stretch of the imagination, to say the least, for Georgia and Sam Pittman to lose out on such a prized in-state offensive tackle like that. That would definitely go against the grain of recruiting history so far. We're also outside the 2021 season, the 2019 season for Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams is a guy, you want to talk about a big piece for 2021, that would be potentially the biggest, along with a guy like Mims. Mims was in town again, but Williams is going to take an unofficial visit. Williams will take an unofficial visit this weekend to LSU for the Texas A&M game. And LSU is one of his strongest contenders there as well. So got a little bit more action too from Saturday night as well. Mavasi Carroll was in the stands again. He saw Georgia play South Carolina and decided he still wanted to come back for the Texas A&M game. I think Georgia's got to be in a very good spot there with him. And another name, Brandon, Will Shipley out of North Carolina, a five-star, the nation's number one all-purpose back. And I know I might not have your attention with all that just yet, Brandon, but I got one for you. You know how fast my man, the young man named Will Shipley, is clocking that short shuttle drill these days?
How fast is that?
Now, Zachary Evans was in the 3.81, 3.83 territory. Everybody remembers that name. Will Shipley is right around 3.92, 3.93 already.
Wow. That's
as fast as anybody on the Georgia football team right now across that measure, that 5-10-5. And that young man puts up touchdowns, receiving touchdowns, rushing touchdowns. He's about 5'11", 195 pounds, a true all-purpose back. Got a lot of skill sets that remind you of the way Georgia would use DeAndre Swift. It does use DeAndre Swift in its offense.
Well, that's really interesting to think about. Jeff Sentell, Marlos Tavern Insider Update. By the way, speaking of our friends at Marlos, they're bringing back one of the great holiday traditions, one of the great holiday gift ideas. They've been doing this now for a while, doing it again right now. With the purchase of a $50 gift card, guests also right now receive a Michelle Brute sparkling wine. What a cool thing to kind of ring in the new year with as you buy a gift card to maybe give to somebody else. But how about even better, maybe something for yourself included here when you purchase a $100 gift card from our friends at Marlos Tavern and enjoy that chef-inspired food. Guests will receive the Michelle Brute sparkling wine, but also a complimentary $20 gift card there as well. So, listen, who am I to tell you what to do with your holiday season? But $100 gift card from Marlos Tavern makes for a great gift. The complimentary $20 gift card is a good thing for yourself to just enjoy some, special date night or special lunch, whatever else. Marlos Tavern can provide that. Complimentary gift card goes in well with all of that. And, of course, the Michelle Brute sparkling wine, great way to ring in the new year. Maybe celebrate Georgia and a win in the SEC championship. It's one of the cool things that Marlos has done now for a while. So stop in, have dinner, enjoy the Marlos Tavern experience, and get yourself a holiday gift card as a great gift for that person on your Christmas wish list that you have to buy for here this year. Jeff, thanks for being here. Marlos Tavern Insider Update today. I will see you on Wednesday, of course, for the Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. That's when it's going to air on the DawgNation video channels as per usual. Do more recruiting stuff there for that. And I just hope you have a very happy Thanksgiving, Jeff.
All right, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving. And everybody, if you got them, get those turkey pants on for this week.
No doubt about that.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Let me just say one thing real quick about the Noah Sewell topic, and then I want to try to move on quickly and go cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. So what I asked Jeff was, hey, what's the appropriate batting average supposed to be for these really, really difficult recruitments, these national recruitments? And, Jeff mentioned a couple names, but I think that not all these names are created equally. I think you could look at two different categories. There's a category of a guy like Kendall Milton, a guy like Tyreek Stevenson, a guy like Nakobe Dean. And to me, those are different than guys like John Emery Jr., Noah Sewell, and Andrew Rain. What I mean by that is Kendall Milton was from California, but he was never going to a California school. There was no obvious choice for him. So when there's no obvious choice at that point in time, if it's Georgia, if it's LSU, if it's Alabama, at one point in time thought to be maybe Oklahoma, Georgia's chances of winning with Kendall Milton were just as good as anybody else. Tyreek Stevenson, had he not gone to Georgia, might have gone to Miami. But the truth is, Miami isn't winning recruiting battles a lot right now. That's not an obvious choice, even for a young man like that from South Florida who was getting a strong pull to the Hurricanes. That's actually not a recruitment where I view Georgia's ever a point spread underdog. Same thing for Nakobe Dean from that Memphis area. Obviously, Alabama's recruited that area over the years, probably better than Georgia has. But we heard Ole Miss is a factor in Nakobe Dean's recruitment. Georgia is not the underdog to Ole Miss for any recruit, even if it's a recruit that's geographically a lot closer. Compare that, though, to John Emery Jr. from Louisiana. LSU wanted him. That's a recruitment where it's going to be hard for Georgia to win that. Noah Sewell, living in Utah. Brother plays for Oregon. If Oregon wants Sewell, that's a tough one for Georgia to win. Andrew Rain, offensive lineman from Oklahoma. Sooners wanted him. Sooners have had a very good offensive line. Have won the Joe Moore Award in the past. So a lot of these national recruitments are not created equal. Some of them are more difficult to win. That doesn't mean that Georgia shouldn't try to win them, but I think it's important for us to establish what's the appropriate batting average supposed to be for these recruitments where seemingly the deck is somewhat stacked against you. Not all national recruitments are the same way in that regard, but a few of these, including the one with Noah Sewell, there was an obvious challenge in Georgia's way, and I don't care, how close Sewell says it was, that obvious challenge was always evident there. So I think that's an important thing for Georgia to deal with. Let's go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of our friends at Royal Caribbean. And speaking of them, you may need a cruise vacation right now. Let's face it, a lot of us do. Fall can be a busy time of year. Getting ready for thinking about vacation, dreaming about that, maybe asking for one for this upcoming Christmas may be a good idea. Let me suggest the all-new Amplified Oasis of the Seas, one of the most beautiful ships on the sea, now made even better with the addition of the Ultimate Abyss, the Playmaker Sports Bar and Arcade, Music Hall, which is a great kind of like nightclub-type venue, Lime and Coconut, which is like a 3-story kind of tropical theme bar, the Bionic Bar that has the robotic arms, and there's just a lot of fun stuff. Really, everyone, adults, kids, everything in between. That's what Royal Caribbean's famous for. And if you go to Royal Caribbean right now, RoyalCaribbean.com, you can find out more about Oasis of the Seas, all the ships in the fleet, and also you can get in touch with a travel advisor to help book that travel for you. It's RoyalCaribbean.com as we go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. So the College Football Playoff Top 25 comes out again tonight. A couple things I'm interested in. Obviously, the Utah-Alabama comparison is going to continue to be interesting. I do believe the committee feels a certain obligation to put the Pac-12 team in the playoff if it is all possible, but Utah is going to keep winning to do that. I do think that the Pac-12's chances of making the playoff were obviously hurt by Oregon losing, but helped a little bit. Remember, USC was 25th last week in the playoff top 25, and they beat UCLA on Saturday, 52-35, something like that. Pretty big, dominant win for the Trojans, kind of validating their presence as a top 25 team right now. There'll be a lot of talk about Alabama on the TV show tonight, but ultimately I think that's just talk. I think they like the idea of drama now, and Alabama's really but the only source of it for the moment. Everything else is, for the most part, kind of paint by numbers, win and you're in for a certain number of teams. But the Alabama scenario at least creates a debate. You'll probably see plenty of that debating going on. I know there was a lot of criticism of how far Oregon fell in the AP poll compared to Georgia. I think Stuart Mandel tweeted about this from The Athletic. He tweeted about that, how far Oregon fell in compared to Georgia. Honestly, I don't think Georgia's resume needs any kind of debate or discussion whatsoever. Georgia's collecting as many impressive wins as anyone. Yes, it has a bad loss. That bad loss couldn't be less relevant right now, though, just given the fact of all the wins they're putting together. Let me talk Iron Bowl here for a moment. And for the people who think that Alabama is going to go on the road to Jordan-Hare Stadium on Saturday and get the kind of flexing performance it needs to really make a case for itself as an at-large team making the college football playoff, maybe needing an impressive, not just a win on the road, which would be Alabama's only ranked win of the year, but an impressive win in doing so. Keep in mind this. You're essentially asking Mac Jones to do something that Tua Tagovailoa, for the most part, didn't really do. Tua played great against the lesser defenses that he performed against. Against better defenses, against stout defenses, the Tua Tagovailoa numbers, for the most part, kind of always took a nosedive. They always took a dip. Now, you may say, well, those also coincide with him being not 100% healthy, which seems like it's kind of, always the issue. But nonetheless, better defenses, Tua didn't play well. So all of a sudden now we're going to say, Mac Jones, hey, against a good defense, and Auburn's a great one, against a good defense, we need you to go out there and play great on the road here in the spot. Well, not even Tua Tagovailoa was a sure thing to be able to do that. Are you really sure Mac Jones is going to be able to do that? I think there's a chance that for the folks who think that Alabama's just going to run roughshod over Auburn as a way of putting itself back in the college football playoff discussion, I don't think this Iron Bowl's quite as easy to predict as some of you might think that it might be. One more quick story from the SEC through and his cruising around the SEC with Royal Caribbean. So we talked yesterday about, or maybe we did, about Ed Orgeron. It kind of a funny thing about Arkansas, how they're not going to celebrate this win because Arkansas hasn't beaten anybody in a long time, and that's just a factual statement, right? I mean, I'm sure that LSU probably wasn't celebrating the win very much, nor probably should it have been, and Arkansas is dismal. He's now apologized for that because that's exactly what you do in 2019. You say something interesting and real, and later on you have to apologize, and I guess Ed Orgeron becomes the latest to have to do that. We'll make that cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. But here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door, let me keep the LSU talk going here for a moment because I think there's something really interesting going on with the Tigers. Georgia's playing in its in-state rival, Georgia Tech, before it plays LSU next week. LSU's playing a kind of made-for-TV rivalry game against Texas A&M. You might think that Georgia's the one who's more energized and emotional about the game that's about to play, and LSU's just kind of checking another game off the box and getting ready for the SEC championship. But, folks, that is not the case. LSU is apparently quite ready for Texas A&M on Saturday. Let me give you a couple of clips that prove that, then I'll remind you as to why. First of all, kind of a funny one about Ed Orgeron, about a rematch with the Aggies after the Texas A&M win. Was it 74-72 from a year ago, long overtime game? Here's what Orgeron said about that heading towards Georgia the following week.
There's no question about that. It's going to be on.
That include the coach?
No question. I'll never forget that game last year. We're going to be ready.
So that's Ed Orgeron saying it's going to be on. Oh, he says he'll never forget that game. Now, for those of you that maybe don't quite remember, not only was this like an overtime, I guess you call it thriller, although it got to be a little odd how little defense was being played there late in the game, but there was also some pushing and shoving after the game. One of Jimbo Fisher's relatives involved with this, Damian Craig, former LSU assistant coach, now a Texas A&M staffer. He was involved in this, as reported by a number of news outlets, threatening a lot of, challenging a lot of LSU guys to fights, a lot of coaches and whatnot to fights. There was some real legitimate bad blood after the game on this. Orgeron apparently remembers. LSU quarterback Joe Burrow apparently remembers too. Here's what Burrow said about that.
Excited for Saturday. Excited.
Because of redemption, because of the way it unfolded, why did that one got him?
Chance to go 12-0.
So the audio clip almost doesn't do that justice because when Burrow is saying these things, he's sipping a bottle of water almost with his pinky in the air, kind of eyebrow raised. He's obviously alluding to something. That's why you hear the laughter there at the end. This is kind of a weird demeanor for LSU to be occupying with only one regular season game left. It would almost seem like kind of a fait accompli that LSU is going to win it and then go get ready for the SEC championship. LSU seems weirdly focused on this A&M game right now, and that's kind of interesting for Georgia just on the basis of it's a comparison for LSU against the team that Georgia just played. I don't know if I like that. I'm speaking as an LSU fan here for a moment, if I ever could be one. I don't know that I want my team this worried about a revenge game against what is, for the most part, an irrelevant opponent here in 2019, given the fact that you got the SEC championship game looming the following week. When you add into this the fact that some people say, well, maybe LSU doesn't even need to win that to make the playoff. Is LSU in the right place mentally right now? That may be worth paying a little bit of attention to. Hey, if you feel strongly about the game one way or another, one of the ways you can make some money off of your expertise with my friends at MyBookie. You can get a bet down on the game, but you got to sign up for an account. The good news is when you sign up for an account, you can get a big first deposit bonus when you use the promo code DawgNation. So here's how it works. Find MyBookie online. Just type MyBookie into your browser. The internet's amazing. It'll do the work for you. Then once you get there, use the promo code DawgNation, and you'll get a big deposit bonus, like up to $1,000. First deposit doubled. So you actually have more money in your account even before you make your first bet. Then after that, you play, you win, you get paid. MyBookie's famous for the best player perks in the industry for the fast, no-hassle payout when you win. When you use the promo code DawgNation, you get a big first deposit bonus. So find MyBookie online, use the promo code DawgNation, and then you play, you win, you get paid. All right, so let's get ready to wrap up here. Georgia yesterday in basketball in Maui did not look good against Dayton. Dayton kind of a NCAA tournament mainstay, and they looked like that yesterday against Georgia. Georgia actually now plays Michigan State, believe it or not, because State got upset yesterday by Virginia Tech. And, boy, when you watch a little bit of that game, the comparison between Georgia right now and Virginia Tech, very, very interesting. Mike Young, first-year coach for the Hokies after having been at Wofford, he's really doing an amazing job with them, just on the basis of the fact they beat Michigan State yesterday. Redshirt freshman guy, Landers Nolly, I believe his name is. Kind of a very interesting comparison to a guy like Anthony Edwards of Georgia. Ant-Man's pretty clearly an elite basketball prospect, but Landers Nolly right now is a very good college player, which is not the same thing. Hokies looked pretty good yesterday. Georgia fans would love to see their team look the same way. By the way, speaking of the Gators, 1123. That's our Gator Hater Updater. We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door. And on video. Yeah, so interesting goings-on with the basketball thing yesterday, where Georgia was never in it against Dayton at all. I think Georgia's fun to watch, but just defensively not very sound and a well-coached team, which Dayton typically is. They're just going to pick that apart, just getting whatever it wanted against Georgia yesterday. Compare that to Virginia Tech, and have another one of these schools that you don't typically think of as a basketball school. First-year coach doing some good things. They're playing a lot of young players. It's more than just Nolly, who I mentioned. A lot of young players. And you beat Izzo and Maui. You've done something. And that was a pretty impressive showing. So Georgia now in the, I guess you can only call it a loser's bracket because I think they have kind of a round-robin schedule. But 9:30 local time, 2:30 our time against Michigan State here today, if you care about the dogs on the hardwood. With that said, we'll dive in. We'll get some Facebook comments, some YouTube comments. We'll do about 20 minutes here. Trying to get off the air around 11:15. So we'll do about 20 minutes here worth of thoughts with you and kind of find out whatever you're thinking about Georgia here today. Somebody said Cookie Monster in reference to Ed Orgeron. Yeah, he kind of gives that off. I really do think the whole thing, and I can't do the impression all that well when he says, we're going to be ready. I feel like that's one of his best clips ever, and I feel like that's the kind of thing that's going to kind of live on soundboards and audio drops and things like that. I actually think that's one of his better ones. Trey Duke says, I need you to ask Kirby why they don't throw over the middle. Yeah, I think my problem with the whole throwing over the middle thing is the way people define it. You know, if you define throwing over the middle as inside the numbers, Georgia probably does that more than some people realize. I prefer to think of it as throwing, between the hashes. And, Georgia has tried to do a little bit more of that maybe lately than some people realize. Just some of these aren't quite falling as of yet. But hopefully that gets better in time for the SEC championship. Lonnie Floyd says, would you consider the SEC championship game a revenge game from last year? Yeah, I kind of do. I do. I mean, I think we all kind of naturally think of Georgia having more backstory and bad blood with Alabama, but LSU walloped Georgia a year ago. Really, I mean, I thought, unfortunately, it was an example of being outcoached on both sides of the ball and certainly out-physicaled on both sides of the ball. You better believe that Kirby's got that on his mind. I think Kirby has a little bit of a natural rivalry with coaches who kind of don't come from the same coaching tree as him. Obviously, Orgeron's kind of an example of that. So, yeah, I do think there's going to be a little bit of, probably not animosity. I don't think there's a dislike between these guys. But I don't think Kirby and his staff liked the way that they were just tossed aside by LSU a year ago. So I do think there's probably a little bit of extra juice from the players who played in that game. A lot of the Georgia players on the roster now didn't, but for the ones who did, a little extra juice, and certainly for the Georgia coaches, I would say there's definitely a little bit of extra juice on that. They'll deny it publicly, of course, and I guess they probably should. But privately, I think there was some I think there was a lot of challenge from what LSU brought to the table last October, and I'm sure Georgia wants to respond to that come December.
I have a take already for this game.
All right.
Stopping Joe Burrow is not the most important thing for this Georgia defense to do if they are going to win this game.
I'm sure you're going to bring up Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and we've been saying that over and over again. I mean, that is – I don't care how good Burrow is. You do not want to play a big game like this as a one-dimensional team. That works on occasion in the NFL. You can win a game simply by throwing the ball. The NFL is just a different league. That, for the most part, does not really work in college football, and we've just been emphatic about that for a while now, really going back years, and certainly this year.
If you go back and watch that Auburn game, which I think Auburn and Georgia play very similar styles, Edwards-Helaire was huge that day for the LSU Tigers, and I think slowing him down and sort of, again, like you said, making LSU one-dimensional is going to be very, very big for this Georgia team.
And one of the things, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I believe if I did, one of the things I think we would see is those rushing numbers for LSU are going up as the season progresses. So I think you can make a case either they're just becoming more committed to the run or maybe they're getting more successful at the run. Honestly, I couldn't really say one way or another, but I have a hunch that if you look at their game log, you're going to see rushing totals going up for them, which I do think makes them a more challenging opponent because, there were moments in the LSU-Auburn game where Auburn had like 7 defensive backs in the game. They're trying to throw as many bodies as they can to kind of get hands in passing lanes for Joe Burrow, which means that you are trying to stop the run with a very limited number of bodies. Now, I think Georgia will play the LSU a little different than Auburn probably did, but it still comes down to, hey, you got to stop the run with your beef up front and what I think of as a pair of very good run-stopping linebackers with Crowder and Rice. One of the challenges of trying to stop the run in a game like this is you don't get to throw a lot of bodies at that problem. You're throwing bodies either at a pass rush or a pass defense. You're left to hope you can have a stout performance from a limited number of dudes in terms of stopping the run. That's why that aspect of the game has such an outsized strategic level of importance.
I also think a thing to watch is how that sort of nickel or star position plays for Georgia. It's been in the Florida game they really targeted Mark Webb in that game. You saw A&M late in that game sort of go after Tyreek Stevenson, and he held up pretty well for the most part. I know A&M fans are not happy about a holding or a pass interference not being called, but besides the point, and you go back to the SEC championship game a year ago, it wasn't Jerry Jeudy that killed Georgia. It wasn't Henry Ruggs or Devontae Smith. It was Jalen Waddle working out of the slot, and I think the two things that I am looking for most in that game when Georgia's defense is on the field is, one, how do they bottle up Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and how do they sort of slow down whoever plays in that slot position? Likely Justin Jefferson, who had a very good game last year against Georgia when these two teams played in Baton Rouge, and that was before Joe Burrow was the Joe Burrow we're seeing now.
Yeah, and listen, here's the thing about the Waddle touchdown, the SEC championship from a year ago, or this upcoming game against LSU. Against an offense this prolific, they're likely going to break something. I mean, you're going to have this moment where Chase or Marshall or one of these guys just sort of gets open. I think it's important for no one to panic, and I mean the players and coaches are not going to panic. I think fans got to be careful not to panic in that moment there as well. Against an offense like this, against a smart coach like Brady, who's working well with what appears to be a very smart quarterback in Burrow, there's going to be a moment where they just sort of see the vulnerability and they attack it. I don't think that the hopes of a shutout against LSU I don't think are obviously very good. So they're probably going to bust a big play at some point in time. You just can't have it happen too many times, nor can you have it be one of these things where they're sort of leaking rushing yards down the field and then bust a big play. At that point in time, it may be turn out the lights and go home. But as long as you are kind of taking away success rate's a big thing for me. Are you getting 5 yards on first down? Are you getting 70% of your yards on second down? Are you converting on third down? Success rate's a big way to look at this. If you're preventing successful runs from LSU, if you're forcing enough incompletions to kind of call it a unsuccessful play for the LSU offense, at that point in time, you can withstand a big play, which is a good thing, because if your only hope for winning is avoiding all big plays, and you've essentially got no chance. So, that's kind of my take on that.
Another interesting thing from last year's game, which the roles are reversed. I believe Georgia was favored going into that game at LSU a season ago. LSU was 6 of 19 on third down, but 4 of 4 on fourth down. They were very aggressive in that game a year ago, knowing that they were the underdog and had a chance to make a statement that day. And I do wonder if Georgia maybe takes that same sort of approach this year, because if LSU beats A&M, I actually might think that LSU is essentially locked into going to Atlanta regardless of what happens, whether they win or lose that game. And that game is going to just naturally, I think, mean a whole lot more to Georgia than it is LSU.
I'm going to get Matthew McGahee's comment after this, but let me just respond to you there and say that one of the things I believe has always been true about Orgeron, although it is only now becoming apparent after he's beaten Alabama, Orgeron is a smart coach, or at the very least, he has done a good job of surrounding himself with smart people. So the idea that you're going to be able to outcoach him, history would suggest you're just not. He's very good against the spread. He's good against SEC teams. And by the spread, I mean the point spread. He's good on the road. He's any subset of the schedule you want to look at, Orgeron's won plenty of games. The big outlier was beating Alabama. He did that this year. My reason for saying that is the analytics folks will tell you that anytime fourth down, going for it's a consideration, the decision to go for it's probably the right idea. The fact that Orgeron has been kind of aggressive on fourth downs was against Georgia, not really a surprise, just given the fact that for the most part, LSU plays, I think, a pretty analytically sound brand of football. For everything I love about Kirby Smart, for the most part, he does not do that. When the numbers have been in his favor for being more aggressive, he's just kind of chosen not to be, and then kind of weirdly swung for the fences when maybe it wasn't quite as needed as you might think. But, Kirby, for everything that he's great about, is not necessarily the most analytically sound coach. I'm hopeful that given what Georgia might have at stake in comparison to what some people think LSU doesn't have at stake, then this would be the day to just kind of play, all out, throwing it all on the table. But that really has not been Kirby Smart's MO. Regardless of the outcome of this season, if I could change one thing about Kirby going forward, I'd love to see him, with the numbers on his side, just choose to be a little bit more aggressive coach, because common sense would say that when you have the more talented team, and Georgia does against virtually every team in America, any potential matchup, you can withstand the occasional miscue. But what you ultimately get put behind the 8 ball on is that when you're intentionally choosing to play too conservative, which ultimately the numbers say you're going to end up getting yourself in trouble by doing that. Mm-hmm. Let me get Matthew McGahee, who said that he thinks the Georgia offense is just really, really close to breaking out. And admittedly, after Saturday's game, I started to feel like, well, maybe it's not quite as close as we were initially led to believe by some of the Georgia coaches and players. However, to have a more solutions-oriented conversation for a moment, how can we make Matthew's statement come true? It seems to me that Fromm's confidence is likely shaken. It seems to me, John Stinchcomb said this yesterday, that if you want to, reinstill that confidence, finding some easy throws for Fromm might seemingly be a good way to do that, kind of pad the stats maybe just a bit. Connor, what is the easy thing that Fromm can do to regain his confidence if we assume that the confidence is shaken after 3 straight games of less than 50% completion percentage?
I've gone back and watched, and I'm sure you've seen all the Twitter breakdowns. And during the course of the game on Saturday, I actually thought Coley called a pretty good game.
I did too.
And as Kirby said in postgame, he reiterated yesterday, it just comes down to execution. Jake had a pretty wide open throw to George Pickens on the flea flicker. Now, I don't know if you want to be tossing a wet ball back and forth between guys, but that's a throw Jake has to make. There were a couple other throws in that game that guys were open, receivers were open, and the ball just wasn't accurate. And I don't know if it's easy throws because you saw in that on the lone touchdown drive, the 2 throws he made to Tyler Simmons and Kearis Jackson, and even George Pickens on the touchdown, those were not easy throws, and he made them look easy. So, to Jake's credit, he is always sort of the same guy, even when things aren't going well. And, I do think maybe playing in dry conditions will help. For anyone who wants to bring up the weather, I think you should go look at the Patriots-Cowboys game from Saturday and look just how miserable both Dak Prescott and Tom Brady played in that game. As far as the fix, I think Georgia Tech is going to be a good remedy. I know they do have a pretty good pass defense, but they're ranked 87th in the run. And, I think Georgia's just going to be content to roll up rushing yards on them and then sort of, as a throwback, maybe take big shots when they're available, when the box is a little bit tighter. And then LSU's defense isn't all that great either, statistically anyway. And, with A&M and to the points that have been pointed out and made, A&M, Missouri, Florida, and even Kentucky and Auburn all have top 25 defenses. LSU is not that caliber of a defense. And so, yes, they have some talent there, but I do think that the schedule is going to make things a little bit easier on Fromm. And obviously getting Cager back I think is going to be a big thing as well. The issue with him is just going to be, can he manage and find ways to not take hits? He was able to do that against Florida, but he wasn't really able to do that against Auburn and Missouri. So
that statement's interesting to me. Do you believe that Lawrence Cage will be healthy for LSU? Because at this point in time, I'm not quite so sure I believe that.
I believe he will play against LSU, and I believe that it will sort of be a question of, okay, how long can he go without his shoulder sort of popping out or his ribs sort of, acting up? Because I believe in the Missouri game it was a rib injury and not a shoulder injury. So I just sort of, or in the Auburn game, I believe it was a rib injury. So I just sort of believe going forward, like, if Georgia wanted to play him against Texas A&M, I think they could have. But I think it just becomes a risk of, popping out or getting hurt again, and he's essentially sort of can't manage that pain. Whereas I think for the LSU game, and it being that sort of big stakes, I do think we're going to see him out there for that game.
Joey Smiley on Facebook, then after this we're going to get some YouTube comments, says, address the elephant in the room. The interior of Georgia's offensive line is just not getting the job done. So here's something I feel very strongly about. I think the Georgia offensive line's actually had a great year. And I think that in a year in which the offense overhaul has not been perfect, I think it's easy to sort of be dissatisfied with every group. But you'd be hard-pressed to find a group that has – I'm talking about any offense line in the country that has consistently opened up holes in the running game, and even against stacked boxes, Georgia's still doing that, and protected Jake Fromm as well as Georgia has. To be this good at both, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone doing a better across all the things you ask offensive lines to do. And you say, well, there were sacks on Saturday. On at least one of those, it was a huge imbalance, on one side.
Can't have 5 guys block 7.
Yeah, I don't think you blame Thomas for that. And, just go back and look at the Auburn game, for instance. Georgia's overall average yard per carry that day, rough day offensively, but the overall average yards per carry, pretty good against an elite defense. So on all the things that we're kind of saying, not great about the Georgia offensive line, the Georgia offense in general has definitely left something to be desired. I think the Georgia offensive line has been phenomenal. Now, is it the greatest offensive line in the history of college football? Are multiple of these guys going to the Pro Football Hall of Fame? That may be saying too much, but honestly, that's the fault of the media for hyping them up that way. That's not the fault of the Georgia players for what they've done. The Georgia offensive line, in my mind, has had a terrific, terrific year. And I see this on Saturday in our Pella Window postgame show. I'll see it now on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door. Georgia's offensive line is part of the solution. They are not part of the problem.
I think the tackles have been outstanding this year, Andrew Thomas and Isaiah Wilson. And I just think because the interior of that line, which has been good, but it hasn't been as consistent, and I think part of that can be chalked up to injuries and just given the rotations they have there. And, Trey Hill is a first-year player at the center position. I just think because it is not on the same sort of standard of excellence that Thomas and Wilson are on, people sort of see it as a lesser than when it's certainly not a weakness.
Yeah, Brandon Howell says Jordan Davis is the next Derek Brown. And, I don't know about the comparison with Brown, but here's what I will say. Jordan, on this list of guys of like, who's the Georgia superstar on defense? Who's the closest to being that? And I said during the regular broadcast that it's really hard to define that because so many guys are playing so well. Y'all, if anything, Jordan Davis just keeps getting better. And I remember the other day, Kirby was asked about Davis, and he talked about what it was they saw in him early on, the athleticism that he showed for being such a big guy. And last year he was terrific in the run-stop role, but I don't know that we saw his athleticism quite so much. Well, he's kind of gotten a couple of sacks here recently. He's a big guy who moves. I'm not going to tell you he's Warren Sapp or anything like that. That's not what I'm trying to say. But he is I think I'm comfortable saying this. I think he's a great player. I think he's a terrific player, and it's more than he's more than just a space eater. I got to imagine that LSU must spend hours talking about what you do with that mass of humanity who's more than, he's not just the fat guy that you put at goalie to keep somebody from scoring in hockey. He's not that. He's a player. He's a real live player, and I'm imagining that the film study, the skull session, stuff that you have to do to be ready to deal with Jordan Davis, I imagine it's immense. I think Davis is a very, very fun player to watch because he's just a force in the interior of that Georgia defense right now.
Yeah, I hope to have a big story on him coming tomorrow. I think the thing that stands out to me with him the most is, obviously all these guys are big and huge and whatnot, but he is a different sort of breed in terms of how strikingly big he is, and the fact that he's able to move and do the things that he's able to do at 6'6", 330 pounds. I've talked about Trayvon Walker in the past and how Georgia just doesn't have a lot of guys that look like him.
Yeah.
Georgia does not have another guy that looks like Jordan Davis and moves like Jordan Davis and plays like Jordan Davis does.
Yeah, I'll bring up a bad memory here for 1 second, then we'll get some more comments. When Georgia played Alabama in 2015, that's a time when I thought, well, maybe Georgia's ready to kind of dance with the devil here. Maybe Georgia's ready to kind of go out here and compete at the highest level. And it couldn't have been less true, right? We all have terrible memories of that game, those of us who are Georgia fans. And one of the things that struck me about Alabama that day is their big guys have great posture. They just stand really tall, and they just kind of shoulders back. Their big guys look like big guys. They're not hunched over. They're not, whatever. They just carry themselves well. Davis is one of those guys as well. There was a video with him, a DawgNation YouTube page from the other day. Like, watch him standing there. To be as big as he is, he almost doesn't look quite that big because he's not like just kind of like his weight's just not sort of spilling out in every direction. He stands tall, shoulders back, chin up. All of a sudden now Georgia has what I used to envy about the best teams in college football. Big guys with good posture, carrying weight well, showing their size well, just really, kind of managing it all well. I really like Jordan Davis a lot. I really like him a lot.
And, one of the things I think he's really allowed is Tyler Clark has become a really, really good player on the defensive line this year for Georgia. And I think because teams are just having to put two guys on Davis because he is just so big and so capable of winning one-on-one matchups, is that it has consistently allowed Clark to be just on one-on-one matchups in a guard, and he's shown that he can win those time and time again.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons why the defensive line for Georgia is such an upgrade this year is because, he brings the size to the table. Clark brings a little bit more of the quickness to the table, and that's just amongst those two. When you start factoring in the outside linebackers and everything else, it just gets amazing. Let me do a couple here on YouTube. Dog Life Ain't Easy says predict the score for the Tech game. We'll get to that here in a moment. Cliff Payne says he could see, speaking of predictions, A&M scoring at least 35 on LSU. Let me bring in Connor on this because I think it's weird how focused LSU is on this A&M game right now. I'm not quite sure I like that. It seems like, why are you picking old fights when you got so much to play for coming ahead of you? I mean, winning the game seeming a lot to be enough. You think A&M's good enough to put up some numbers against LSU? What do you expect to happen from this kind of made-for-TV rivalry that suddenly feels like it has a little real hatred to it?
Well, I think last year when you saw Kevin Falk, LSU's director of player personnel, going to fisticuffs with Jimbo Fisher's nephew on the sideline.
Yeah, you got to throw Damian Craig in on that.
Damian Craig was involved as well.
Who was it? Was it Steve Cragthorpe that said, and I'm not making light of this.
I believe Cragthorpe said that he had been punched or pushed by Fisher's nephew.
But he also has a pacemaker in.
Yes.
So he says he got so he said punched. He said that they got me right in the pacemaker. The later video certainly makes it seem like he was only pushed. But, man, y'all should read up on this. I think I may I'll try to catalog some of this for a thing I'm doing on DawgNation in a couple days. But y'all should go back and just read all the stuff about this. It's like sort of classic SEC soap opera type stuff. The point, though, is kind of what do you think about the bad blood here and how it impacts the game? What do you expect to see from LSU A&M?
Well, I think LSU kind of knows if they win this week, they're going to be in no matter what. So, you sort of put all your emphasis on this game. You get to 12-0, and you're thinking, all right, we're in and we're playing with house money. And, look, Ed Orgeron hates Alabama. Just despises. You don't force the leak of the Roll Tide. What? I can't say the next
Right.
part because it's a family show.
Right.
But you don't say the sort of things and have the team do the sort of things they did to Alabama after they beat them if you don't have an intense hatred for them. Does that Orgeron really want Alabama getting into the college football playoff? Because I believe Oregon and Utah will have already played on Friday night when they host the Pac-12 championship for some reason on a Friday night when no one wants to watch it. So we'll likely know Alabama's fate going into that SEC championship game. Why would Ed Orgeron want to help Alabama and get Alabama into the playoffs and set up a potentially another scenario of 2011 where LSU beats Alabama in Alabama during the regular season and Alabama somehow gets another shot at the title and another shot at LSU in New Orleans, no less, which is where that title game was played and the title game will be played this year. Part of me, this is conspiracy tinfoil hat, part of me wonders if Orgeron is like, all right, we lose to Georgia, it's not the end of the world because we should be in the playoff regardless, and a Georgia win completely blocks Alabama from getting into the playoff.
So can you imagine if first snap SEC championship game, here comes Miles Brennan jogging on the field? I would love that. I just love to watch the debate happen after that. I mean, I said this the other day that one of the things that frustrated me about the Tua Tagovailoa aftermath is I don't want the era of load management, which is obviously a dirty word in the NBA right now. I don't want that to come to college football. So I hate the idea that the SEC championship might really be a load management type game where LSU truly doesn't need to win it to make the playoff. I can't stand that. But listen, at this point in time, I'll take whatever I can get in terms of however Georgia sneaks into this thing. I'll take it no matter what. The only thing I keep saying, though, is I don't think it's quite as easy as other people seem to think it is in terms of, well, LSU, if they go 12-0 in the regular season, they're definitely in the playoff. For the most part, that is something we just really haven't seen a lot of yet. I mean, when we saw Ohio State making it as an at-large team in 2016, I believe it was, the other Big Ten team was a 2-loss conference champion, right? That was Penn State, right? So a little bit easier to make that case. For the most part, we're not leaving out a lot of one-loss conference champions. So if Utah is a one-loss conference champion, and if LSU loses to Georgia, becomes a one-loss at-large team, I don't know that we've seen a one-loss conference champion excluded from the playoff yet. Have we?
A one-loss conference champion excluded from
an 11-1 conference champion left out of the playoff.
I know Stanford lost twice the year they blew the doors off of Iowa.
I guess maybe you'd say Baylor and TCU had that.
Yes,
back
Baylor
in
and TCU, correct.
But they were also chosen. The team chosen over them was another one-loss conference champion.
And Baylor and TCU did not have a conference championship game that year, so they essentially shared a conference title.
But that's I don't care what the committee says. That's not the reason why they got left out of the playoff.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. So anyway, that's that. Let me do. We're about 5 minutes over. Let me do a couple quick Facebooks. We'll get ready to go. Troy Sadowski here, the great Georgia tight end, says, in order to beat LSU, we're going to have to score 24-plus points. Is our offense capable of it? I think that Troy's right about that. I think at the minimum it's 24. It may be 27, and that's actually being really, really generous. I mean, it may even be more than 27. But I think Troy's right. It is not a skinny point less than 24. Can Georgia score 24 against LSU? I think so. But can you win this game 24-23? Does it need to be 27-26 or 27-24?
28.
28-27?
I think 28 is the number Georgia needs to get to.
I mean, here's what I'm hanging my hat on. I'm hanging my hat on the fact that it's going to be antiseptic conditions, roof over your head. I don't feel like the LSU defense is anywhere near as stout as an Auburn playing on the road. I wouldn't even say I think the LSU defense is maybe even as good as Florida. I don't know. I have to look at the numbers on that, to be honest with you. I'm hanging my hat on this LSU defense just being gettable. I'm hanging my hat on that. I think the Georgia running game could really matter in this. And I said this yesterday. Jake Fromm has had great moments as a Georgia quarterback, and he's had a series of bad moments. it would be a mistake for any of us to say, well, now these last 3 games is suddenly who Jake Fromm is, and this is a static situation where he's now less of a quarterback than he used to be. I think someone who's been great before, even if it was just for periods of games, moments in games, someone who's been great before can be great again. You just need that greatness to coincide with a really big game against LSU. So even though Fromm has struggled to make throws the last 3 weeks, it is still, to me, entirely possible that he makes a couple of big throws against LSU. And if you add a couple of big throws to go along with what is going to be a running game that shows up, that to me is your recipe for getting to 28. That's how you would do it.
And I would just say, yes, he has not looked good the past 3 weeks, but he looked great against Tennessee, and he looked great against Florida when they needed him to. So we know Fromm can do this. We know last year against Alabama when no one really gave him a shot of playing well, he rolled up 300 yards and 3 TDs on that Alabama defense. Fromm was not the reason Georgia lost that game that day. So, yes, he struggled, and frankly, as long as the people in Mercedes-Benz don't decide to open the roof while it's raining in the middle of the game, I think Fromm is going to be able to give you enough to where you sort of feel comfortable with him.
Robert A. Smith says he thinks that Georgia needs 30 at minimum, which gives me pause at this point. And I do, Robert, agree with you that the more you – it's funny, we're only talking about 2 points difference, right? But 30 just feels way different to me than 28 or even 27. Mm-hmm. It seems way tougher, which means you need another really big day from your defense to be able to get that done. But let me just kind of make one more final point here, and then we're getting late. If you go back and listen to this show during the offseason, I joke about this before, we're nothing if not self-aware. For all the playmakers in the Georgia roster, if you go back and listen to our shows, especially our R.S. Andrews cooldowns, we essentially bet the over on all of them. Big year from Zamir White, big year from Demetrius Robertson, big year from this guy, big year from that guy. Everybody's going to be scoring points. Everybody's going to be collecting yards. And obviously, we're always destined to be wrong about most of those people, but off-season is when hope springs eternal. I'm not going to apologize for that. However, there's one guy who I hyped up and hyped up and hyped up and hyped up, and it's turned out that he is just as good as advertised, and that's George Pickens. And I'd say the Dominic Blaylock, who's Connor's guy, not too far behind here either. So we still haven't quite seen what it looks like to see Cager, who's been the real deal all year long, with Pickens on the other side of him and Blaylock on the field together. Given what we've seen various times, think about the slant pass that Blaylock caught late against Texas A&M. Just say that out loud. Slant completion for the Georgia offense. I mean, how great does that sound? That's what Dominic Blaylock provided you. George Pickens was laughing at dudes on Saturday. They couldn't cover him. And obviously Georgia would do well to get the ball to him more. But, I mean, Pickens is just tossing guys aside. And people, A&M fans will whine about that face mask deal. Look, the SEC is a violent league. There's going to be collisions at the line of scrimmage. I don't know which one to tell you. There's going to be some fisticuffs there on this press man coverage. You get off that press man. Sometimes there's going to be a little shrapnel involved. But, listen, it's what it is. The point is that Pickens is hard to guard right now. Blaylock is a cerebral receiver if there ever was one. And Cager's been a sure thing all year long. So all of a sudden, healthy Cager, the continued emergence of these freshmen, we overhyped a lot of guys. We were right on Blaylock and Pickens around here, though. We were right about those guys.
We were. I was going to make a final point, and I'm just blanked on it now. As great as Rodrigo Blankenship is, and as much as we love him, the Georgia-LSU game is not a game you want to see him.
Nope.
Georgia needs 4. They need 7s. They don't need 3s. And those 4s add up.
Yep.
Turning those red zone – and granted, I believe Georgia's first in the country in points in the red zone. The problem is that a lot of those have been field goals. Georgia needs to get touchdowns when they get into that red area.
Yep.
In a game like this where the margins are so incredibly thin – they need to find a way to turn those 3s into 7s, which they were able to do against Florida.
And let's define it this way. Red zone is not 20 and in. Red zone is 40 and in.
Yes.
Scoring opportunity is once you cross midfield, get inside that 40. How you call plays in that moment determines what's a field goal and what's a touchdown. Red zone is 40-yard line and in. That's the way we're going to think about this.
And Georgia did a great job of that against Auburn. They scored touchdowns every single time they got inside the 40-yard line.
All right, let's go rapid fire. Don Williams says Blaylock's going to be that dude. Pickens as well. Don, I think you're right about that. John William Adams says, think there's advantage to an all-or-nothing game for Georgia. Also, seniors leaving. Juniors get last year's taste out of their mouth. Yeah, listen, I think the Georgia focus is going to be where it needs to be, y'all. Don't be scared of LSU. Do not be scared of LSU. I can't guarantee you anything, but don't be scared of that. Don't be scared of that team.
I don't think anyone, last year when Georgia was a 2-touchdown underdog against Alabama, they were not scared of that game in that stage.
Yeah, but you saw the comments. I'm not trying to bring up negativity, but you saw the comments on Saturday on the Pella Window post-game show and a lot of the stuff you've seen on Twitter. There's a lot of talk of, and by the middle of the week, this stuff typically subsides anyway, but a lot of talk of, oh, man, Georgia can't win this game, blah, 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 blah. I'm telling you right now, Georgia's not a perfect team. But you better believe that Georgia is absolutely as much a national championship contender as anyone is. I cannot guarantee that this won't end for sadness for all of us who want to see Georgia win this thing. I can't guarantee that. But the idea that somehow Georgia is less of a championship contender than the other top 5, top 6 teams in America, it's just not true. Georgia's built a little bit differently, but the potential end result is exactly the same.
Don't lose the forest through the trees.
Yep.
I wrote this morning sort of comparing Georgia and New England right now because they're both sort of in the same spot where they have historically good defenses and offenses that are kind of muddling along and struggling. I am a Patriots fan. I've made no bones about that.
Sure.
The offense isn't playing great right now, but they're still finding ways to win, and I do think there's something to be said. And I think at the end of that A&M game, as lousy as the offense was, when that team got the ball with 4.5 minutes left in that game, they did exactly what a great offense does. They bled the clock, got third down conversions, got into third and shorts, and got third down conversions, and salted that game away so where A&M did not get the ball back. I think that is what great offenses do, and I do think that drive in particular, when Georgia absolutely needed it, should be an encouraging sign.
John Wayne, thanks for the kind words. My sweatshirt here for my friends at Tailgate Apparel. They got this great kind of like retro stuff. That's what I like to wear. Plus, in a day like this, we're kind of casual this week for Thanksgiving, so little hooded sweatshirt, kind of a great way to go there on that. Rick Wallace says, don't be surprised if it comes down to Hot Rod hitting the game-winning field goal, though.
Would not.
Can you imagine, for a guy who's already beloved, and the great photo you've probably seen of him kind of running through the sign on Saturday, can you imagine how much he would add to his legend if he would, obviously the Rose Bowl kick was amazing, but that wasn't the game-ending, game-winning kick. Can you imagine if it's zeros in the clock and he's, kicked the field goal to, win the game at the last second, what that does to what is already a pretty impressive UGA legacy and certainly a lineage of just support over the last few years.
Would you say he's better than Kevin Butler at that point?
Ooh, that's tough. That's tough.
So no.
It's tough, although – different eras. I mean, I hate to cop out on this, but it's such a. It's just so different, right? I mean, there was less scoring in college football back in the '80s, so kickers mattered more than they do now. Where there's obviously touchdowns being scored left and right. I'd be curious to know. I think also. You're kicking with a T back then. You're not kicking with a T now. Mm-hmm. I don't 100% know if that's true or not, but it seems like it might be true. Two great kickers. Butler's obviously the only place kicker in the College Football Hall of Fame, I believe. Tough to make that comparison, but Georgia's been lucky to have them both for their career. All right, y'all, thanks for being here. We will have all the stuff you've come to expect. Mike's got his show today. We got Before the Hedges tomorrow. We are going to pre-record that just because Jeff's going to go out of town for Thanksgiving. So that'll be on the page tomorrow, 3 p.m. No show, obviously, on Thanksgiving for us, but we're back. We will have a Black Friday show. So we kind of pretty much always do DawgNation Daily on Black Friday. We'll do that for you the day after Thanksgiving as well, and maybe even have a commitment to talk about, depending on when Mr. Zykevius Walker decides to make his decision. Also back live tomorrow, 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door. Y'all have a great day. Thanks for being with us. We'll look forward to speaking to you then. But before we go, a couple quick things here. First of all, if you're looking for something to do this Thanksgiving weekend, make sure you check out AJC.com. You get Atlanta news now, kind of stay up with everything going on in the news, but also just really fun collection of Thanksgiving stuff. Falcons have a game actually on Thanksgiving night. Season for the most part over, but certainly interest in the rivalry game. You can read up on that at AJC.com. Get some enemy intel on the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. Great coverage of the Jackets there at AJC.com, plus plenty of holiday events kind of getting going. Follow all of that at AJC.com. Also, huge thanks to R.S. Andrews for making the R.S. Andrews Cool Down possible. Air, heating, plumbing, electric. We trust R.S. Andrews to do all those things for us. You can trust them as well because their clean screen, trained and timely techs will show up at your house and do exactly what they said they would do for the price that was promised. It's rsandrews.com. they will deliver a smile for you. Thanks for being here. We'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. It's DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door.